What is going on, everybody? Welcome into Alarm Fantasy Football. I'm your host, Howard Bender, and as you can see, nobody's in sight. That's right. You get me and only me. And that's right. I'm right off of the Fantasy Football Expo. Britt Flynn, Andrew Cooper, they are both traveling either today or yesterday. I don't know what they're doing, but neither one of them are here, and that's okay. I'm here, fresh off the Fantasy Football Expo, and I'll just be completely honest. I haven't slept yet. I came in last night and, flight delays and stuff like that. So today's show will be sponsored by none other than 5 Hour Energy. Why? Because I need it. So cheers to everybody who's there. Fatty McFats sitting in the chat already, my brother. Cheers to you on this one. Let's go. Okay. Who's ready? Who's ready? Who was there at the Fantasy Football Expo? Chime in the chat room there. Say hi if you want. Ask any questions that you want. You got fantasy questions, draft strategy, keeper questions, you name it. I'm here by myself. We're going to talk about the Fantasy Football Expo. We're going to talk about the drafts that I did. I did a 14-team snake, and I did a 14-team auction. And then we also, some good friends of mine were in the Queen's Classic draft at the Fantasy Football Expo. So we're going to talk about that. Now, because, Ernie Acosta, my illustrious producer, he's a little shy. He's a little camera shy. So I've decided that Jon Impemba will be here because you guys don't need to see my ugly mug for the next 2 hours, do you? I don't need to see my ugly mug for the next 2 hours. So we're going to bring in handsome Jon Impemba, who's probably dealing with a ton of FOMO right now because he was not at the Fantasy Football Expo. But we're going to talk some quarterbacks, SuperFlex, league setup and things like that. So by all means, like I said, we've got 2 hours here together, and it's going to be an absolute blast. Now, for those of you who didn't go to the Fantasy Football Expo, I'm sorry. You're going to see a ton of stuff on social media from analysts, from guests who were there, subscribers, listeners, and it was a blast. Once again, I got to shout out to my man Bob Lung from Big Guy Fantasy Sports. He's also he does the consistency guide over at for Big Guy Fantasy Sports, and Mr. Consistency himself. I really wanted to bring him onto the show, but after such a crazy, wild, unbelievably successful event, I think Bob needs to sleep today, right? I think Bob needs to just kind of huddle up in bed and just kind of snooze that one out because, this was fantastic. The panel discussions were all great, all informative, really kind of helping everybody along. The meet and greet, though, that's what it's all about. And so if you do have the opportunity, we do it it's the same weekend every year. I believe they do it the weekend right after the Hall of Fame game. And it's in Canton. Everything was hosted at the Pro Football Hall of Fame. The drafts were at the Hall of Fame. We had the full expo in the giant dome, which was absolutely unbelievable. They played flag football on the field. Oh, actually, they played flag football in the dome because of all the rain. They were going to play it on Tom Benson Stadium field, which is what they did last time. But alas, the weather didn't really hold up too much for us at all. So, but seriously, this was just a great time. The networking for the inter-industry people is great, but this is a fan fest. Is really what it is. This is a chance for you to come talk fantasy football, meet your favorite analysts, hear the panel discussions, watch the drafts, and then, hit us up. Like that's, there were multiple parties. There's a Friday night party, there's a Saturday night party, and everybody's just there hanging out. And I got to tell you, the number of FA Nation people who were there, absolutely phenomenal. I could literally sit here and list people's names who I met for the first time and people who I met last year at the expo. So longtime subscribers who hang out in the Fantasy Alarm Discord. This was absolutely spectacular. I come back from that, and you know what? I'm going to be honest. I come back from this expo, and my ego's a little bigger. It definitely is because you guys are so kind, so cool. I begged of everybody to please say hello. Don't be afraid to come up and say hi to me. That's what we're here for. That's what we're doing this expo for. So never be shy about it. Never be shy. You got to make sure that you are always always in there and always active because it's a thing for you. Fantasy Football Expo isn't for us. It really isn't. It shouldn't be. And listen, and I actually, what, I did speak to one person who did say something about the fact that they did think that it did seem a little clicky with industry people and industry people, and just kind of staying together. I mean, not the experience that I had whatsoever, and not the experience that a number of analysts I know who I was hanging out with, from Nate Markham to Lauren Carpenter, stepmom Lauren, Jeff Mans and I hung out. Bob Harris was there, JJ Zachariason, Hutch Brown. I mean, the list is just absolutely endless, and we're there for you. And so I got to tell you, I mean, you're going to be bombarded with pictures. You're going to see lots of stuff. We're going to talk about these drafts. Super fun, super important to just kind of be a part of it. The community is it gets sometimes the community gets a bad rap on Twitter. I'm not going to lie. Sometimes it does get a bad rap on Twitter, and you've got people who troll. You got people who are just strictly about engagement tweets, and you've got people who are just kind of in it for themselves. I didn't catch that vibe. You know who else didn't catch that vibe this weekend? Des Bryant. I'll tell you what. I've talked to athletes and interviewed athletes who are paid to make appearances, or they're pushing a product or something like that. The level of just genuine sincerity from Des Bryant throughout this entire time, like, literally, it blew me away. And I'll say this because you all know, anybody who listens to me on Sirius XM Fantasy Sports Radio, the nonsense I put up with Jim Bowden and the Cowboys. You know it. I know it. It's never fun. We got the how about them Cowboys thing, but between meeting Michael Irvin at the FSGA, Fantasy Sports and Gaming Association conference, I think it was 2 conferences ago, and then meeting Des Bryant and getting to interview him. The interview is on Sirius XM. So if you have Sirius XM, go to the SXM app and go listen to Sunday's Fantasy Alarm Show. It was me and Justin Fensterman with, Des Bryant, the folks from High Points and from Personal Corner. And it was unbelievable. And of course, like, a little piece of me dies inside when I have to celebrate the Cowboys and talk about it. But it was so genuine. And then if you follow Des Bryant on Twitter at Des Bryant, the tweets that he was saying about the community and how it really felt to be there, and what he saw, what he witnessed. Now, a lot of people can be like, well, of course, everybody was kissing Des Bryant's ass. And that may be. That may be. But there are a lot of people who don't believe in just kissing an athlete's ass like that, because they know that they're, usually paid to be in that spot. Not only did the interview just an absolute blast, but after the interview, I got a chance to, like, just sit and talk to Des for a couple of minutes, and it was incredible. I mean, he was super into it. And one of the things that we did talk about was the balance between fantasy players who, the idiots who berate a player on Twitter because they had a bad game, and how athletes can sit there and hate on the fantasy community because of that. But we talked about that balance, and he's legitimately serving as a liaison between players and the fantasy community. And to have that it's absolutely unbelievable. So again, listen to that interview on SXM. Go onto the SXM app, search for Fantasy Alarm, or search for the Fantasy Football Expo. I'm sure it's under, like, fantasy interviews also. Definitely check all that out. Now, I don't want to sit here and just constantly just go off on an event that some of you might not have even been in attendance to. I'm, like, scanning here for the chat just to see if Mr. Scampers is here again, because I actually met Mr. Scampers in person for the first time over at the expo. So him and Dustin Lutke was there as well. So just a great bunch of people that I got a chance to meet. So I'll throw that out as the endorsement. We'll talk more about it as we move forward here, and we talk about our the drafts that I took part in, and show you those draft boards, and just maybe take some thoughts here and there, maybe explain to you why I took this player at that time, because you'll see number of different reaches, and we'll explain all of that why. But before we do that, we always love to hit the what's going on in the latest news and reports. So we're not going to go with the D. We're not going to go with that today, because today we're going to start with another episode of everybody's favorite soap opera. That's right. It's the running backs and the Restless. Where's my man Ern? You got my image for me here? This is one of my absolute favorite images here. There it is. There, the running backs and the Restless. This is the most amazing soap opera that's been going on right now. And again, I just love the Nick Chubb cuddle onto Austin Eckler. I think that's absolutely one of the best. And McCaffrey just looking sharp and dapper there. But let's talk about this right now, because running back news way abundant again. Oh, yeah. I love it. Thank you, Ern. So let's talk about. We'll start off with some news that Colts head coach Shane Steichen says he expects running back Jonathan Taylor to be back with the team next week. We know the problem that's been going on here, and it's very upsetting. You've got, look at Jonathan Taylor right there. Let's just look at that guy. That guy looks like he wants to run the football, doesn't he? I don't know what the deal is with the ankle. I don't know how much is really, him being slow to recover, how much is gamesmanship. We know the stuff back and forth with him and Jim Irsay was an absolute nightmare. It really was. Irsay didn't handle it properly. And you know what? In all honesty, the players haven't handled it well either. This whole trying it in the court of public opinion and bringing your complaints and your gripes to social media, it's not the way to do it. But Steichen says that he expects Jonathan Taylor back with the team this week. That's definitely encouraging. We know that we want Jonathan Taylor to get in on this. Listen, he's going to be great in this offense. The offensive line, I've heard some people kind of crack on that offensive line for the Colts. But, if you look at the Fantasy Alarm draft guide, which available to everybody right there, fantasyalarm.com/draft guide, comes with the cheat sheet. You could do that, or you could just, get the whole thing, the all pro package. But I'm not gonna corporate shill us here. I want to talk about what's going on. The offensive line, Dan Malin ranked them 15th overall. A better, last year they were a much better run blocking line than they were a pass blocking line. Made a couple of moves here and there, but didn't really do, they didn't really change up the offensive line personnel to the point where you're like, oh no, what's going to happen? Can these guys get together? Can they gel? They can. But I'll say this, the run blocking, absolutely fine. The pass blocking is definitely, I'm very curious to see how they handle things, because Anthony Richardson, who should be the week one quarterback, he's going to start things off. He's mobile. He's going to be able to roll out. This is not flat-footed zombie Matt Ryan. This isn't, Carson, the ghost of Carson Wentz. This is, a legit guy who's going to run around. Now, I'm not going to overhype Anthony Richardson. What I'm saying, though, is that the use of RPO in this offense is going to end up making Jonathan Taylor a better player. Sure, Richardson's going to want to sling the rock. Richardson's going to want to find his receivers downfield. I'm not against that. But to have an asset like Jonathan Taylor is going to be useful. So to see him getting back into camp, we'll hope, fingers crossed. We'll do it that way. In other news here, ESPN's Kevin Seifert reporting that Vikings head coach Kevin O'Connell said that Kareem Hunt, who spent a little time with the Vikings visiting, is maybe a potential fit on our football team. O'Connell also said that Ty Chandler jumped out in Thursday's preseason loss to Seattle, but here's another situation where Alexander Mattison is expected to be the lead back. The problem is the offensive line and the way that they've got it. They're doing a hybrid blocking scheme. Instead of doing the zone blocking scheme that Minnesota used to do, where, Gary Kubiak and Rick Dennison set that up. Instead of doing that, they're trying to do a hybrid thing. So they're going to do some power gap blocking and some zone blocking. It's definitely, you're not catering to your offensive lineman's strengths, because if you start doing zone blocking and you got guys who don't move well laterally, well, then that's a problem. If you're doing power gap blocking and you don't have a big 350-pound behemoth to throw somebody around and slap them around like that, then then that's a problematic thing. So, having that pass catching running back, whether it's Ty Chandler, Kareem Hunt, is definitely going to be important to the Minnesota Vikings. The problem is, though, is that we all know that our good friend Jim Bowden spoke to somebody in the Cleveland front office who basically said flat out, didn't basically say it, flat out said, Kareem Hunt lost a step. We saw it last year. That's why he ended up getting phased out of that Cleveland offense. That's why they had zero interest in bringing him back. So, Kareem Hunt's making the rounds right now. We know that he went to the Colts. We know that he was talking to the Saints. Now he's with the Vikings. So this tour is going to continue. We'll have to see what happens, but be careful if you've got Ty Chandler. It's just something that you're going to have to watch. It's just, I'm not going to say drop Ty Chandler. I'm not going to say get rid of Ty Chandler. You have to wait until you see the team actually make the move. A lot of these teams, they just kick the tires on these players because they want to see what they've got. If they have to make a move, they want to see how this player is already fit into their offense, what they look like right now. Can they pick up the playbook? It's not necessarily just bringing somebody in for a visit doesn't necessarily mean that you're definitely signing somebody. It just means that you want to make sure you know what your options are moving forward. Speaking of options moving forward, the Raiders keeping theirs wide open. Zamir White, probably right now listed as the lead back for the Las Vegas Raiders, while Josh Jacobs, that saga continues. I mean, again, more soap opera drama, but the Raiders bring in Damian Williams. So, I mean, listen, I'm not a big Damian Williams guy. He could fit nicely into this Josh McDaniels offense. We do know that McDaniels does like to utilize pass catching running backs. I think Zamir White fits that mold. And could probably handle that role. But, to give Damian Williams a look, again, probably not too bad. Nothing says that he's, etched in stone or everything in like that. Looking at the chat here, Brian Wild, I know it's not related, but how would my draft strategy change for 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, a flex, and a PPR? How would your draft strategy change for that? I don't really think that your draft strategy changes at all. 3 wide receivers seems to be that standard, right? 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, and a flex. That's kind of standard right now. That's the way it is. I mean, it depends on where you are in the draft. A lot of people are grabbing, obviously Chase and Jefferson are the 1 and the 2. And then you start seeing some running backs like Barkley and Nick Chubb and Austin Eckler go. For me, I don't mind doing, getting that anchor RB. There's a great article in the Fantasy Alarm Draft Guide from Britt Flynn talking about anchor RB. And that's just basically saying that you get one rock solid running back inside those first 3 or 4 picks. And then you fill around there, whether it's all wide receivers, whether you grab a tight end in there, whether you bring, you get like a high-end elite QB, but you lock down one running back. And I'm always a running back guy through and through. So I will definitely say that I would, if you're looking at that, because you start 3 wide receivers and you don't want to get yourself all stressed out when you start seeing everybody pulling those wideouts out, try that anchor RB strategy. Make sure you get one RB to lock in there, and then you can fill in the gaps around there with wide receivers and possibly even a quarterback. So, yeah, all right. So you've only done 2, 2, and 1, which means that you are usually probably like, you know what? Let me just load up on RBs, and I don't have to worry too much about the wide receiver. So here you go, Brian. Make sure check out that article in the Fantasy Alarm Draft Guide. And utilize that anchor RB strategy. I personally, I'll still go 2 running backs in my first 3 or 4 picks. I'm fine with that one as well. It's also how comfortable you are knowing the player pool. if you know that you're confident in some of those mid-tier wide receivers, the guys that you get in round 7, 8, 9, if you feel comfortable with those guys, you can kind of load up on them as well if you want to grab some extra running backs. But with the starting 3 wide receivers, you're going to see a lot of people in your league who are going to jump on that as much as possible. So I hope that helped, Brian. And of course, you see my Twitter handle right here at RotoBuzzGuy. You can hit me up on Twitter. If you are a Fantasy Alarm subscriber, message me in our Discord. Happy to sit there and talk things through with you, help you out in your draft. That's one of the reasons, one of the big benefits of the Fantasy Alarm Discord. Just so you guys know, you could be in your draft and ask a question, and you're going to get a response from somebody. We know that it's draft season right now. So if you tell us, you like go to that Discord and you write at FA Analysts, that's going to alert all of us. And so if you're in the middle of your draft, say that right off the bat. At FA Analysts, drafting right now, here's your question, and hopefully we'll be able to nail that down for you. Easy peasy. I see Rich McEwen in the chat. What's up? At Lethal43. Rich, one of my absolute favorite Fantasy Alarm members. Killed my soul to miss the Expo this year. But as my better half said, you want to go next year? Then you need to win this year. Yeah, I know. He's made that investment, and in a lot of these high stakes leagues. So I absolutely love that. I did miss you, Rich. Had a great time hanging out with you last year. I don't know if anybody can see my. Oh, there it is, right there. You can see the bobblehead doll that Rich gave me. It's right next to my Trey Anastasio prayer candle. Oh man! All right, back to the running back news here as it's coming in. Article in The Athletic, Jeff Zrebiec. Zrebiec. I'm trying to pronounce that properly. Here you go. Ravens running back Melvin Gordon could be at risk of not making that 53-man roster. I'll just say this. If you thought that Melvin Gordon was going to make this team, if you thought that Melvin Gordon was going to make an impact, then that means you're only looking at the name. You're not looking at what he does anymore. You're not looking at anything else. That's a great image right there from Ernie Acosta. I love that. Listen, Melvin Gordon, we saw him already lose a step, and that was a couple of seasons ago. So him trying to, jump back into it, into the air raid offense, I'm not into that at all. They might as well just stick with Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins for all I'm saying. Fatty McFat says he's shocked. He tells me he's shocked. I'd like to know why you're shocked, Fatty McFats. Why? What's the surprise? What is it? Hit me up. Let me know. In the meantime, maybe he's just shocked about Melvin Gordon being on the bubble. Maybe that's the case. If that's the case, yeah, well, there it is. Low-hanging fruit, baby. Low-hanging fruit. Here's a nice, interesting one. Yes, I know, buddy. Fatty McFats. Good dude. Here's something actually that I do find very, very interesting in the sense here is that the Zach Berman of The Athletic says that he's projecting Trey Sermon to make the team's roster over Boston Scott. I find that incredibly surprising. I really do. I mean, overall, skill set wise, I think I like the style of runner that Trey Sermon is. He's been miserable with pass blocking. He hasn't broken through in any stop that he's made. He was with the Eagles last year. He was, with the 49ers before that. And it's been a little bit on the disappointing side. But if this is what Berman's projecting, keep an eye on that, because I think that could actually kind of muss things up a little bit. We're already getting a lot of great talk about Kenneth Gainwell and how he seems to be the early down guy, and how DeAndre Swift and Rashad Penny seem to be the pass catching guys. This backfield is really turning into a hot mess. It really is. I don't know if anybody wants to do that. Oh, by the way, I do know that DeAndre Swift is missing off of the latest version of the Fantasy Alarm cheat sheet. That'll be corrected tonight. I saw that, and submitting a new copy of that draft grid. I mean, he's in the rankings, so you know exactly where I have him ranked. But as far as the cheat sheet goes and where he belongs, I mean, you'll be able to tell basically, especially if you know ADP. But I'm so out on DeAndre Swift right now. It's ridiculous. I'm almost as out on DeAndre Swift as I am J.K. Dobbins. I'm actually more out on DeAndre Swift than I am J.K. Dobbins. I don't think either one of these guys will grace any of my fantasy rosters at all this year. I just don't believe in either one of them. And so, I'm picking up Kenneth Gainwell as like a 12th round depth play, but I think he's going to be the one guy who's continued to be in that mix for the Eagles. Here you go. Dallas coach Mike McCarthy said that the team was impressed with running back Deuce Vaughn's preseason debut. Now, I mean, listen, I'll give it up for Deuce Vaughn, right? Look at him right there. Looks fantastic. He looks a lot bigger in that image than he actually is in real life. Way, way bigger. Unbelievably. But I mean, listen, he's, one of the coach's sons. It was a nice draft pick that everybody made. He's basically competing with Rico Dowdle for that, that backup running back spot. I don't know. Some people are grabbing him as a late round pick in best ball. I just don't know how much work he's actually going to get. I mean, he could be like that Boston Scott, Darren Sproles type guy that the Eagles used for all those years. And maybe Dallas is going to include him in that fashion. I still think Dallas needs to focus on a between the tackles back because I don't think Tony Pollard is that guy. So keep an eye on Deuce Vaughn. Again, late round best ball, maybe he's an option just if you're looking for somebody who's got some sort of potential. But that's about it. All right, question here from Rich McEwen. One question, of course it's possible. What kind of adjustments to the cheat sheet for tight end premium leagues? All right. This is a very important thing here. Tight end premium. It gets overrated. And, because Rich, I know you're a baseball guy, I'll be able to equate it to you like this. Everybody overrates everybody for an OBP league in fantasy baseball. That's what happens with tight end premium. All right. The premium aspect that helps Travis Kelce. It helps TJ Hawkinson. It helps Kyle Pitts. It'll probably help Darren Waller a lot more. But once you start moving further down the list, everybody sits there and they chase all these tight ends thinking, oh, tight end premium. Think about what the scoring is. If it's a full point PPR for everybody else and tight ends get 1.5 per reception, how much are you really getting out of them? Because, 5 catches per game. On average, I don't think there's very many tight ends who are getting 5 catches per game on average that you're thinking, wow, this is going to be, an absolute steal. You're really not getting that much. So while, yes, I would, if I'm looking at the cheat sheet, I'm looking at the way it is right there. Kelsey's a first rounder. The other guys, I'm still taking where, can take where they are. If you want to take TJ Hawkinson in the 3rd round because it's tight end premium, okay, fine. In regular redrafts, that's still a little high for me. I don't really know if I would want to, really pay that price. So I think it helps boost like the value of like the top 5 or 6 tight ends, but it doesn't really go deeper beyond that. So be very careful by overrating that. Is it a mistake to dupe tight end premium? No, it's definitely not a mistake to do tight end premium. I don't think you need to add it to your existing league. I don't think it does. It doesn't do that much. It doesn't really move the needle that much. If you're the guy in your home league that's drafting Travis Kelce each and every year, it's going to help you. But overall, I don't think tight end premium really moves the needle all that much in the grand scheme of things. It helps the top few guys, but that's about it. So, all right, moving on here. Let's, what do we got? Any other, some injury updates here we can take a look at. According to Zach Taylor from the Bengals, Joe Burrow's calf strain is quote unquote progressing as he should. No news is good news when it comes to Joe Burrow, right? As long as you don't hear that he's re-aggravating it or that he's, he was, sitting on the sidelines because he tried doing some workout and then it didn't work for him. No news is good news. Swaggy Joe does not need the preseason. Swaggy Joe will be fine. You just keep him on the sidelines, getting healthy. He should be available for week one. If they don't use him for week one, it's strictly as like, you know what? We're pretty comfortable with Joe Burrow, the rest of the way. If we need to just err on the side of caution and be careful, let's be careful. So if you are drafting Joe Burrow, do be sure that you've got yourself a good, solid backup. I mean, it doesn't have to be a top-notch guy, but you know what? If you're looking later in your drafts and you find that nobody's touching Aaron Rodgers, nobody's touching Geno Smith, you can grab one of those guys as a backup, hold on to him. You see how Joe Burrow heals. You've got somebody in there, and then once Joe Burrow gets back, you can look to either trading the backup QB or just holding on to him until the Bengals bye week. Either way, I would make sure that you keep yourself protected as best you can. Kenneth Walker returned to individual drills over the weekend. Congratulations there. Zach Charbonnet's back at practice. Kenneth Walker is there. Kenny McIntosh, he's still out. So I mean, this is all. I think that this is Walker's backfield with Charbonnet getting possibly mixed in, but he's more of like a complimentary back right now. They're not going to do that major split. So just be very be wary of that, especially where people are drafting Charbonnet. I mean, I think it's fine where he's at, but it's always tough when you're going to handcuff it because you have to make that investment a little earlier than you wouldn't like. Speaking of injured over the weekend, Davante Adams. This is the quote out of Josh McDaniels here was that the leg injury isn't crazy serious. That's what we heard. I don't really know what that means. It isn't crazy serious. Maybe he thinks he's just day to day. Keep an eye out. You just want to make sure. I'm still fine. I'm not going to downgrade Davante Adams at all. He's not going to move down in the cheat sheet at all. He's not going to move in my rankings at all. I'm comfortable with where he is. But let's monitor this leg injury and see really what's going to happen with him. Also, Kendry Miller from the Saints, sprained knee. So I don't know. Maybe does that give a little bit more life to the possibility of them signing Kareem Hunt? I don't really know. But with the Alvin Kamara suspension, with Jamal Williams being the between the tackles guy, it should be definitely interesting to take a look at for sure. All right, let's pull off the news here. Let's go to some drafts. Let's talk about at the Fantasy Football Expo, the Kings Classic drafts. Now, the Jim Brown division, which is the division that I'm in, we do one snake draft and then we do one auction draft. Usually it's the same people. There are a couple of names here and there that switched up from going from snake to auction. But overall, I think, just a great group there. I had the 10th pick overall, and Ern, if we could bring up that draft board there, please. This is something to take a look at here. I'll talk you through some of it here. We're going to probably spend a lot of our time in the back end of this draft, but here you go. You can take a look. Andy Behrens, Jeff Radcliffe, Curtis Patrick, Dave Richard, Pat Doherty, Bob Harris, Dom Cintorino, Jody. I mean, this is like the heavy hitters, baby. This is where it's all at. Jim Coventry drafting right in front of me. And as you can see right there in the first round, Jim Coventry, you son of a bitch. How do you take Nick Chubb? I'll tell you a funny story here. So we were trying to go through the draft order. Everybody drew a playing card. And, once they started off ace, king, queen, jack, 10, 9, 8, 7. And depending on where you were, then you got to pick your draft spot. Something happened. Somebody I guess Bob Harris got skipped over or something like that, or he wasn't paying attention when they were like, who had the 6? So when I asked, I was like, is it my turn? They were like, yeah, you're up. Where are you going to pick? And I was like, what's open? And they told me the 8th spot was open along with 13 and 14. So I was like, all right, fine. Give me the 8th spot. I'll take that. As you can see, Jim Coventry drafting 9th, but when everything got sorted through and Bob Harris chimed in, he took his draft spot. And then when it was time for me, I could stay in the 8th spot or, no. Jody Smith took that 8th spot. So I moved to 10th. Now, if I was still in the 8th spot, I could have grabbed me some Nick Chubb, but Jim Coventry took him at the 9th spot, which left me out in the cold there, out in the cold with Bijan Robinson. Yo, what up, Stacks? I see you in the chat there. What's going on? Love the Pirates logo. Not going to shout, not going to say nothing bad about fantasy baseball, except for the fact that my teams are slipping because I missed waivers yesterday. That was a huge bummer. But good to see you, Stacks. Appreciate you joining us here in the chat. We're talking about the Kings Classic Jim Brown Division Snake Draft. If you're just joining us here, want to, bring everybody to light of, if you missed the broadcast over the weekend, what happened in this industry draft. 14-team PPR, usual scoring, 4 points for a passing touchdown, 6 points for another touchdown. Yardage is the standard stuff, 1 point per, 25 passing yards, 1 point per 10 rushing yards or 10 receiving yards. The use. So anyway, so I moved to pick 10. So it was me right after Jim Coventry. Colby Conway from Fantasy Alarm was there drafting next to me. So of course I knew, and this is something you always got to pay attention to, and I'll explain this in even more detail as we go through it. Colby Conway, Brad Evans, Jeff Manns, and then Brian Drake. That's how the back end of this draft went. And this is where we're going to stay focused. Because one of the articles that I usually write this time of year, it's called Know Thy Enemy. And anybody out there who's read Sun Tzu's The Art of War knows Know Thy Enemy. And that's just basically, it's know thy enemy as well as you know yourself. And I'm paraphrasing all of this. I'm not direct quoting it, but it basically means you need to know who you're going to battle with here. And the more you know about them, the more you know about the people you're drafting with, the better off you're going to be if you're paying attention to what they're doing in the draft. So like Jim Coventry, for example, he said, he knew that once it was, when it was me and then him, he was like, all right, I'll have my choice between Bijan Robinson and Nick Chubb. When I was after him, he was like, all right, I know I'm getting Nick Chubb because I don't think anybody's taken him before that. And that's what he did. So Jim Coventry knew what I was going after, just like I know Colby Conway wants his Texans. And then even further in there, Jeff Manns. So for those of you who might not know, Jeff Manns, a fantasy guru right now. He used to be here at Fantasy Alarm. He was actually the gentleman who hired me at Fantasy Alarm back in 2010. Now, I came in primarily as a baseball guy. I had done football coverage, and I've obviously played a ton of fantasy football, had my fair share of championships. But when I met Jeff for the first time and we started talking fantasy football, he's the guy who taught me that you have to break down these systems. You have to understand how the game of football is played before you start saying, which players you're high on, which players you aren't high on. So I know what Jeff has taught me as far as learning systems. And I know that the article series I do in the draft guide is something that he used to do back then when he was doing that for Fantasy Alarm. And it's something that he does right now for his subscribers over at Fantasy Guru. But just like any good coaching tree out there, I like to say it. I like to say that Jeff Manns is Bill Parcells, Howard Bender, Bill Belichick. Yeah, that's right. I'm the guy who is putting my own spin on things and doing some great stuff with that, putting my own kind of take on certain things, the way I'm looking at offenses as well. But I know that Jeff and I have very similar styles. And so I know what players Jeff's looking at. I know which coaches Jeff goes after. And I'll tell you what, you don't need me to talk here about the first round or the second round. I mean, the players are the players. The thing about it is knowing who you're up against, knowing what you want to do, and watching the draft as it's happening. So you'll see Cortland Sutton in the 5th round. And I know that all of you are like, dude, even though it's a 14-teamer, the 5th round, that seems excessive, especially when you're getting Cortland Sutton in the 9th or 10th round. But as I was sitting there looking at all the wide receivers who were coming off the board, and I had me some DeAndre Hopkins. You guys know I like me some DeAndre Hopkins here. I went Miles Sanders with that 4th round pick because in a 14-teamer to have three bell cow backs like Bijan, Ramondre, and Miles Sanders, that's going to go a long way. That's going to go a real long way. But so there we were in the 5th round, and I'm looking, and I look at Jeff Manz's team. Oh, thanks, Dustin. Appreciate that. Bender killed it, baby. But here's what went down. I looked at the draft there in the 5th round, and I looked at, the players, how I have them ranked. And I know that I have, the cheat sheet all printed out. Oh, I want to shout it out to Clay Wagner, who works for the Pro Football Hall of Fame, who rescued me by printing out the cheat sheet for me so that I could have an extra copy of that in the auction draft. I already had ripped through the rankings on that during the snake draft, but so I want to make sure I shout out Clay Wagner, Pro Football Hall of Fame guy, who really bailed me out there. But anyway, so I look at Jeff, and he's got Devontae Adams, he's got Najee, he's got Javonte. He made that move for Josh Allen at QB, and I'm not going to begrudge that, but I know that Jeff's going to start looking at wide receivers. He took tight end Evan Engram, he took Alvin Kamara. But to me, that was more in line with the fact that, some of his guys weren't there, i.e. Cortland Sutton. I'm willing to bet that Sutton would have been one of Jeff's picks there in the 5th or 6th round. He went tight end and then Alvin Kamara. I'm willing to bet that he was going to go with Sutton with one of those picks. Because when you're playing in a league like this with these guys, you're going to want to do that. So I grabbed Cortland Sutton. I got the groan from Jeff. I got the bender, and a couple of expletives there as well. And so, Cortland Sutton, boom, fine. When Jeff ended up doing that, then coming back into in the 7th round there, I did the same thing to him with Romeo Doubs. There's another guy, right? Everybody loves Christian Watson, but I'm looking at the way this offense is built. I'm looking at what I know that Matt LaFleur wants to do. I know that we're seeing Green Bay's offense in its purest form. And so in that sense, I know that Doubs is the guy who I think he's a better route runner, and I think he's going to end up being that possession guy, that move the chains, lean on him in a PPR format. I think that's absolutely fantastic. So, I grabbed Doubs there. Then if you just kind of go through the rest of my draft, I mean, listen, am I short on wide receivers? I don't know if I'm short on wide receivers. I tried to get some upside there with Rashee Rice. I've got Odell Beckham as my 4th wide receiver. I'm not in love with it. I'm definitely not in love with it. But I will say this, trading is allowed in this league. And I've got Bijan, Ramondre, Miles Sanders. If Dalvin Cook does sign with the Miami Dolphins, that's going to be a huge running back asset. And then Devin Singletary is going to be another asset. Now, mind you, if you notice, there's no kickers, there's no defenses. We start one quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, a tight end, and then 3 flex. So I could start all these running backs the entire time. If somebody needs a running back and I can make a trade, I'll pick up a wide receiver for them. I don't care. That's perfectly fine with me. This is what we're putting into our flex spot. It's another reason why I took these 3 tight ends. Obviously, they're all kind of upside plays. I ended up having to punt the tight end position. I just really wasn't, when Colby grabbed Dalton Schultz in the 5th, I knew I was in trouble because I didn't want to reach too high. I know I wanted to build up some receivers in those middle rounds. So I knew I was going to have to push tight end down. But as you learn in the Fantasy Alarm dynamic tier rankings, this is what we do. We end up taking guys who do have, a safe floor versus a guy with high upside. I kind of went the upside route here a little bit. I think Hayden Hurst has a good floor. I think he's going to be a safe play. So I'll take the upside that Mike Gesicki does become a big wide receiver, as Bill Belichick keeps putting it. And Logan Thomas, who I know is, got a little banged up during the preseason over the weekend. I will take that chance that maybe something happens with Logan Thomas and his target share. Eric Bieniemy comes from Kansas City. He's been using that offense that Andy Reid designed, and he's been putting his own spin on it, but he's also been used to just seeing the tight end getting all of this work. So Is that worth kind of a last round pick? I think so. I can watch what's going on with the Washington tight ends over the first week or two. And if I don't like what I see, I can cut Logan Thomas without thinking twice about it because it was a free pick, basically. Um, and so I'm going to kind of, move in that direction with him. We'll just see how it goes. So I thought that went, overall, I thought this draft went really well. I like, top to bottom. I mean, I love my running backs. I like my quarterback situation there. Tua, him and Geno Smith in case Tua gets hurt. If Tua gets hurt, I can always also pick up Mike White because I think he fits in beautifully into this offense. So I'm digging on that one for sure. And then, listen, I've got some wide receivers there. Like I said, I'm going to look to possibly trade a running back a little further into the season. We'll just see how it goes. I've got flexibility right now with this roster. So that was the snake draft. Clean and simple. We all had lunch. I watched Andrew Cooper do some interviews, made myself a little burger at the burger bar that they put out for us. And then it was time to dig into the auction. Now, the auction, obviously, much, much more exciting than a standard snake draft. And there it is. Earn Dog's throwing the sheet up right there. And you guys can see right there, that 10th Bender, the Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews, Bijan once again. And we're going to talk about this one here right now because I don't know. I'll say it. If you have the opportunity to do an auction, listen, it's more complicated than a snake draft. It's harder than a snake draft. You have to think about budget. You have to think about who's, how much money everybody else has. You have to figure out what players you want to nominate and why. I mean, you've heard it here on the Alarm Fantasy Football Show, for the last couple of weeks. Well, we've talked a little auction strategy. We did that with Drew Davenport before. Britt Flynn and I did a show that we talked about auction strategy. So there's a lot more that goes into it, but it's also really effing good. I'm thinking about dropping some F-bombs here because I'm tired and I'm all yipped up here on the old 5-hour energy, but I'm going to bring it down. I'm going to go a little zen here and be able to do it. Look at Dustin right there off the bat. The value you got on Lamar was insane. That stack definitely should have cost me more. Yeah, I got to tell you, Dustin actually did he was doing the draft board during the thing. He was putting everything into the computer for everybody. So shout out for Dustin for doing that. That was great work on that front there. And we had an absolute blast with that one. So, again, set your budget. It's a $200 budget that you get. So set up your budget of what you want to spend on certain players, where you're going to go for big money, where you're not going to go for big money. And, in my mind, I actually thought about kind of, not punting quarterback, but just saying, you know what? I'm just going to go with like the cheaper quarterbacks there. I'm going to do like, a cheaper Geno Smith or a cheaper Aaron Rodgers and make that happen. The first player nominated was Lamar Jackson. And I jumped in on the bidding there, probably somewhere around like 10 or 11. And then it went to, then I pushed it to 14. And you know what? All right. Before I do that, let me just give you an auction strategy situation that I've talked about over and over again. So if you're just joining me for the first time here on this show and you're doing an auction, one of the things that I love to do in auctions is I bid on the 4 or I bid on the 9. Okay. So if somebody says 11, somebody says 12, I go to 14 because I'm going to put the onus on that person who I'm bidding against. Is this a $15 player? Do I want to move into the next tier of pricing? You do it with the 9 as well. Somebody says 16, somebody says 17. I'm at 19 immediately because that means that the onus is on them. Is this a $20 player? Is this a $30 player? Do I want to go into that next level? And sometimes they will, but in a lot of cases, they really don't. You can see some of the pricing that I've got here. That I won. I won a 14, a 29. Here's a 49. Here's a 14. Looking down there. Yes, Miles Sanders at 22. Brandon Ayuk was at 21. I went to 19. Somebody said 20. I said 21. And then crickets. So I was happy about that. But what you're doing there in the auction is you're kind of pushing people around a little bit, and you're demanding that they make that decision. Is this? I already know if I feel like that player is belongs in the next tier. I already know where I'm going to go. If that person says 20 or that person says 25, I know that I'm already ready to go to 26. All right, or even 29 for that matter. So when I pushed it to 14 for Lamar Jackson, and then nobody went after him. I was like, boom, sold. I knew I was going to stack it with Mark Andrews right then and there. I knew, not stack, pair. I got to be sure. I got to watch my semantics here, because a stack is 3 or more players from the same team. A pairing is a quarterback with their top target, whether it's a wide receiver or a tight end. That's a pairing. And so I knew I was going to do that. I knew I was going to make that pairing. And so somebody threw out Mark Andrews, and the bidding went up. Now, the question that I got asked by a ton of people. Oh, by the way, Lamar Jackson at 14, it was a ridiculous bargain. If you look around on this draft board here, and I'll tweet this out for everybody so that they can check it out, or maybe EarnDog can put that in the maybe the ticker at the bottom or something like that. Maybe we could do something like that, so that people can see this link to this draft board here, so that they can kind of check out the pricing. But if you look at how much everybody else went for, Justin Herbert went for 17. I see Trevor Lawrence at 14. Jalen Hurts at 19. Patrick Mahomes went for 21. Josh Allen at 21. Justin Fields was a high price. I can't even see what that number is right now. It's but it was still pretty pricey. And so when I saw that, when I saw the prices going up for all of these players, I was like, man, Lamar Jackson was a flipping steal at 14. That allowed me to say, I am 15 for Fields. Thank you, Dustin. My eyes, I got my contacts in, but again, I haven't slept in I don't know how long now, so I'm not seeing anything clearly. So to have Lamar Jackson at that price, I knew that I could take, the money that I saved on Lamar Jackson, like saved in my mind, and I could put that towards Mark Andrews. But what I also was saying to myself was, in order to make this stack happen, make this pairing happen, I knew I had to treat Mark Andrews more as a wide receiver one than to really treat him as a tight end, and budget wise. Because you look at where all the top price wide receivers went, a lot of them in the 30s and 40s, for some of these guys. To get Andrews at 29, I knew, again, 3 flexes. So I could put Andrews in my tight end spot and have like a 4th receiver there, and then use a lower cost tight end who I got later on in the draft, in my flex. 3 flexes. You're never always going to be able to put, especially in a 14-teamer. You want a wide receiver there, or you want a running back there, but if you can get a high upside wide tight end and throw somebody in there, I don't know. Ern, I grabbed a couple. Can you scroll down just a hair here and see who else I got? And besides Logan Thomas, which was my last pick, I did that. Yeah, keep going, buddy. I see it. Keep going. Roll that. Scroll that. Keep going, and here it comes after Aaron Rodgers. Ooh, Sam Laporta, $4. I can use him. I think he's in a great spot in Detroit. Jawan Johnson for a couple of bucks. That's going to be in a really nice spot. And then, yes, my Logan Thomas pick. So that was great. Thanks, Aaron. We can go back up. I just wanted to show everybody the tight ends and how I was utilizing them as a potential flex play. Sam Laporta, right? Think about where the targets are going to go for Detroit. Where's Jared Goff going to throw? He's got Amon-Ra St. Brown. He doesn't have Jameson Williams. Jahmyr Gibbs, yes, they'll utilize him in the passing game, but none of these other wide receivers are impressing anybody by any stretch of the imagination. Oh, Khalif Raymond got a 2-year extension. That doesn't put him on my radar. Sam Laporta, he goes on my radar, and I like that. So anyway, so Mark Andrews, to me, if you want to say that I overpaid for him at 29, that's fine. I don't care. because I treat him more as like a wide receiver one. And that, and having that and him and Lamar, it allowed me to go up on Bijan Robinson. I probably should have gone with Colby and gone the extra dollar or two for Nick Chubb just so I could lock down my boy Nick Chubb. But screw it, man. I had Bijan in the other one. I might as well use him in this one here as well. So it allowed me to get some Bijan Robinson. And then the wide receivers that I got, I didn't want to go crazy over the top here. So you look at it, 14 for George Pickens, 21 for Ayuk, 14 for Cortland Sutton. These mid-tier prices for guys who definitely have the potential to be the number one. I think Ayuk could outperform Deebo Samuel, and I think Cortland Sutton can outperform Jerry Jeudy this year. I genuinely believe that. In my eyes, I got the wide receiver one for both of those teams, for San Francisco and for Denver, to go along with Mark Andrews, and then you throw George Pickens in there as a wide receiver 3. I'm very happy with the way that went. I really, really am. 2 rock-solid running backs, 3 rock-solid wide receivers, one of the best tight ends, and a top-rated quarterback. All right, we can scroll down again there, Ern, and let's go beyond Cortland Sutton and just pop in and see what we got going on there. Yep, Tyler Algier, got to make sure I get that handcuff. Roshan Johnson, we'll see what happens with him. Alan Lazard, we know that Aaron Rodgers likely to kind of be a comfort, a security blanket for Aaron Rodgers in the early part of the season. Kenneth Gainwell, Aaron Rodgers is a backup. Alec Pierce. You want to talk about the possibility again of a wide receiver 2 actually being the team's wide receiver 1? Oh, man, I think Alec Pierce could be just as good, if not a little better, than Michael Pittman in this offense. I mean, a lot's going to hinge on Anthony Richardson, but still. So, and again, you guys have to remember, it's a $200 budget, and it's 14 players, and it's 14 of like the top drafters around. I love these guys so much. All the competitors that we were in. I mean, Kevin Tompkins was in this auction. That was great to see. By the way, I have to go on record here. Andrew Cooper, if you are listening, I will back up the story from Kevin Tompkins that he did bid on Miles Sanders. He was in on the bidding on Miles Sanders. I bumped him up to 22, and Kev had to let go. So I felt good about that. And I just kind of shouted out for Kev Tompkins for actually bidding on some running backs there, man. Mazel tov. Dustin says only $49 for your 3 wide receivers is probably the best value across the board. Some teams spent that on 1 or 2 receivers. Dustin, do you want a hug? I mean, I hugged you when I met you. We hugged it out a couple of times, I think. I'm a hugger. I am. I love, just good people. And I've said this to a ton of people at the expo. Good people find good people. Good people gravitate towards good people. And I do consider myself a good person. I do. And so when I get like people like Dustin who show up, he's a hugger too. I get him or Nate Markham and his wife, Carrie, stepmom, Lauren Carpenter, and her husband, Jeff Carpenter. We all just kind of gravitate towards each other. Nate and Jen Provault. I hope I'm pronouncing the name right, but those two, unbelievable. Just such great people all around. Scampers, Darcy, just the whole crew there. So I'm a firm believer in that. It's the energy that you put out there. The energy that you put out is the energy that you get back in. So I'm totally in on that. And I appreciate the kind words, Dustin. I really do. It's a tough group to draft against. Very, very tough group to draft against. And we'll see what happens. Now, I want to talk about the Queen's Classic. And I will talk about the Queen's Classic. But before I do that, I've got my man, Jon Impemba. We're going to talk some quarterbacks. He's got all these articles in the Fantasy Alarm Draft Guide. He is the quarterback coach for DFS every single year. You want to talk about a guy who knows quarterbacks, that's fantastic. He's coming in here. So stick around. We got a quick word here from our friends over at Front Yard Fantasy, and then it's quarterback talk with Jon Impemba.
I feel like this is a quietly contentious point in Dynasty Fantasy Football, what it means to actually be rebuilding. Some people say you should never truly be rebuilding. How do you view the rebuilding versus competing dichotomy in Dynasty?
So I will be the first person to acknowledge that my preferred format of fantasy football is just redraft. The years that I have played Dynasty, it has been I've drafted a win now team because I've seen people that have just gotten into the cycle of rebuilding and thus they just don't make any progress. So if you're rebuilding for the 5th year in a row, I just, I don't know exactly how you get out of it, but yeah, it's definitely something that can happen. And a lot of people, especially when we come out of the NFL draft, everyone's just instantly shipping off, draft picks and everything. So, I mean, it's definitely something that can happen.
Joey, do you feel similarly to it? Do you feel like you see people getting stuck in the rebuilding loop?
I mean, I would say people that try to rebuild in the beginning of seasons, of their fantasy seasons, I see them get stuck in that rut. I would really try to only ever rebuild if I knew I was going to miss the playoffs. Like, I'm always trying to play to win, even if it's maybe I don't know.
I think my big thing is the word rebuild is a much shorter time frame than I think most people say it should be. Like, they look at rebuild as like 3 years out competing. Rebuild, you're looking to compete next season. You know what I mean? Like, if you're doing it now, you're looking to revamp, and maybe there's a one season where you ship it off, but that very next season you should be competing. If you're doing it like that, I'm cool with it, but you got to have a plan, not just keep getting the young players, keep getting the draft picks. Otherwise, you end up like Tim. Maybe not like Tim who gets a bye, but you make the playoffs, you're in that like 4 to 6 range every year, just hovering in the middle. Nothing ever gets better, nothing ever gets worse.
I think I play like you in Dynasty, Simon. I play in 3-year windows.
100%. That's my go-to. And with the rate at which Dynasty leagues turn over, you should really only ever play in a 3-year window.
All right, welcome back, everybody. I'm Howard Bender. This is Alarm Fantasy Football. We're analyzing drafts from the Kings Classic. We're going to be talking about the Queens Classic draft as well. Was just throwing out some strategy for everybody for the auction draft and how I kind of pulled things off there, as well as the snake draft. And so, yeah, so I mean, if you're just joining us on YouTube, you can always rewind on YouTube. By the way, shout out to our Front Yard Fantasy guys over there. If you follow Joey Wright had the best outfit going. This baller sweatsuit that just looked absolutely phenomenal. I was very jealous because I can't pull it off. Joey Wright could definitely pull it off. Had such a hot look going on there. And then, yes, a little final comment here on my auction draft. Dustin Lutke says it, yes, every time when I said when I threw down a bid. And actually, you know what, Ern, can you just bring up real quick? Can you bring up the auction draft board for me one more time? And scroll to the bottom of it there, because I want everybody to know they called me Bender the Spender, because when it got down to it here, Alan Lazard, at that point, I was at the top part there. I had the hammer. All right. And I love having the hammer. Now, I didn't have the hammer at the very tail end of things, but I had the hammer fairly late. I grabbed me some Lazard. I grabbed Gainwell. I threw Aaron Rodgers out there for $2 and nobody said anything. I stole Sam Laporta from Andy Behrens for $4. I stole Alec Pierce as well. And everybody was like, where's all this money coming from? Well, y'all should have been paying attention right there. So Bender the Spender was in the house. And yes, again, I feel it was a very successful auction draft. We'll constantly keep you guys updated as the season's going on of how that works, so that we can see whether it's a proper strategy or not. All right, let's bring in my guest here today. You guys know him at JImpemba777 on the old Twitter machine. He is the second most handsome man in this live stream right now. Because come on, John, look at this
Hard,
shirt.
hard to argue. Hard to argue.
Look at this shirt I'm rocking here. Would
I was
you
gonna
ever
say.
wear a shirt like this?
No, maybe if I was back on the cruise, going around Italy, maybe I'd throw something like that on.
This is my George Costanza Cabana wear, man. I love
Yeah.
that. I love this. Well,
like
actually, Frank Costanza, not George. In any event, John, thank you so much for joining me here. I appreciate that very much. In case you were wondering, I got like 3 of these in me right now.
Yeah.
I haven't slept. So I figured, you know what? Let me bring in an expert. Let me bring in the quarterback guru here over at fantasyalarm.com, because I do, it was great at the expo. I was doing a Q&A in one of the panel discussions, and a woman asked the question, basically talking about quarterback ADP and where we as fantasy experts are kind of going. We've seen this shift right now with quarterbacks, and everybody's in on these, on the early quarterback picks. We're seeing, 7, 8 QBs going within the, from like rounds 2 through rounds 5 or 6. We're seeing this going on. So we know what the ADP is, but let me ask, I want to know what your personal preference is. Like, who are you taking most often, and why are you doing it?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I've always talked, like, I like running backs that have that rushing potential. Last year I found a great value, obviously, in Jalen Hurts because the team was willing to invest in him on the passing side of the football, knowing that his legs are good enough to make him a top 10 fantasy quarterback, as we saw, in that sample size the year previously. So when I come to drafts this year, I go right back to Justin Fields, where, he's coming off the board at like QB6, QB7, somewhere in that range. And the team made strides to invest in their passing offense. They traded for DJ Moore. They drafted an offensive lineman. So now you're kind of reshuffling the order of those wide receivers on that team. He's not stuck throwing to like N'Keal Harry anymore when Darnell Mooney goes down. He has DJ Moore. He has Mooney. He has Claypool, who hopefully will get his head on straight and be able to contribute for them. He has Cole Kmet. And then you add in the fact that he's a 1,000+ yard rusher, to that fact that he was a top 5 fantasy quarterback last year, while throwing for 2,400 yards, I think it was, or something in that range. So, the fact that I think that he's going to take a step forward throwing the football, we already saw what kind of playmaker DJ Moore could be just in his first catch as a member of the Bears and that type of offense. So I'm going Fields where he's going in drafts right now, just for that rushing potential. But a guy that I was grabbing early as well, but he's starting to really start to climb the boards, has been Justin Herbert. Earlier in the offseason, there was like a pretty significant round difference between Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert. I didn't really understand why. I felt like those two guys could give you very similar numbers. We've seen a 5,000-yard passing season out of Herbert already. We've seen 30 touchdowns already out of Herbert. But coming off of last year, he had a little bit of a down season touchdown-wise, and people were just kind of downgraded him. I didn't really get the understanding there. Now, if you go look at some of the ADPs we see now, starting to climb back up the board, he's still coming off there around that same range, like QB5, QB6 in that area, but the round is costing you more than what he was previously. So Fields and Herbert are the two guys sort of in those, not the early quarterbacks, but like the middle to early quarterbacks that I'm looking to target.
So would you say this year you're on Justin Fields like you were on Jalen Hurts? Like last year coming into the preseason, I'm talking about like March, April, May, you were like, Jalen Hurts is the one that you want. Jalen Hurts is the breakout guy. Are you in on Fields in that same fashion?
I think I am this year. Now, obviously, the difference is where you get to take Fields this year versus where you could take Hurts last year. He's obviously a little bit more expensive. But yeah, again, it's hard to ignore the rushing potential and the fact that some people are still passing Fields because they don't think he can throw the football, which kind of mind-blowing to me. You look at the offenses that he's had to they didn't even really let the man throw the football for the first 3 games of the year. But if you go from like week 4 to week 17, he had like a 65% completion percentage. So you can look at the yardage and be like, well, he didn't really throw for a lot of yards. It's like, okay, but their offense wasn't set really for him to be successful passing the football. They got him a true number 1. They used their first-round pick on an offensive tackle. I'm buying in on Justin Fields just here in the talent and see if he can take that step forward this year.
Now, when you deviate from the norm, basically you don't get Justin Fields and you don't get Justin Herbert. Maybe you're on the back end of a draft, you missed the run, whatever it is. Like, what direction do you take then and why?
Yeah, middle rounds or late middle rounds. I got a couple of guys that I go. Daniel Jones, for one. Again, the man ran for 700 yards last year. And while I think asking him to run for 700 yards may be a little bit too much, we are also talking about a quarterback that showed he could run for 700 yards. And his coach, Brian Daboll, coached Josh Allen, who's putting up multiple 700-yard rushing seasons once he sort of developed and evolved under the Brian Daboll offensive system here. So a lot of people are discounting Daniel Jones because he only threw for 3,200 yards and 15 touchdowns last year. But once again, what were we talking about? What were we looking at last year for his wide receiver group once everybody went down? He's throwing to 5th, 6th, 7th wide receivers on that roster and really did the best that he could with his legs to make that team into a playoff contender. Now, they didn't do enough for me to love at wide receiver. I like that they brought in Darren Waller, but we obviously know that there are some potential risks involved with Darren Waller. Jalen Hyatt is my highest rostered wide receiver on Underdog for best balls because he's essentially free. But I just look at the depth chart for the Giants and think like, who is really better than him or who is like so far ahead of him that he can't just leap and be a starter? Really nobody. But if we can get a healthy year out of Sterling Shepard or Paris Campbell or guys like that, or Isaiah Hodgins continues to be a productive guy, I think there's enough for Daniel Jones to take a step forward and still give us maybe 500 yards rushing this year. So I like a lot of Daniel Jones. Deshaun Watson is another one where I feel like people, again, kind of downgrade him because of how he performed at the final weeks of last season. I'm just going to give that a wash. The man missed an entire year plus of playing football, got his legs back under him, let him get a full camp in, let him get a full preseason in, and let him start the year as a starting quarterback and not kind of just sitting around playing practice and see how the season develops. He was a top 5 quarterback the last time he played a full season. I love Amari Cooper. I think Elijah Moore is kind of an interesting ad for them if you can get the most out of that talent. And Njoku is a stud tight end if you can get a good quarterback. Donovan Peoples-Jones, and then they drafted Cedric Tillman, who I think is kind of an interesting guy there that I think could potentially leap David Bell here. So like Watson, and then my last guy, Kirk Cousins, is someone that I've been looking to pair if I'm doing a lot of those like late round. Coop calls it yin and yang for his tight end group. You can kind of call it yin and yang at the quarterback as well. But, Kirk Cousins for me is another guy that seems like he just gets no respect because when it comes to real life football, he kind of has that sort of stink on him as not being that great. But for fantasy purposes, he's a guy that has a 4,500-yard season. He has a 35 touchdown season. Now you continue to give him Justin Jefferson, the best wide receiver in football. He has now a full season with TJ Hawkinson, who, when those two connected last year, were almost as good as any quarterback tight end tandem in football. And then you replace the old man limpy Adam Thielen with Jordan Addison. And now you're going to have Jordan Addison in that offense. KJ Osborne as the wide receiver 4 or 3 in that offense. So I'm very bullish here on Kirk Cousins if you're looking to wait in the drafts this year.
All right, just a heads up, John. Adam Thielen's mom watches this show on the regular, so if you could just like shoot an apology for calling him Old Man Limpy.
I mean, it's the facts of the matter, man. I'm sure he'll be fine in Carolina this year, where there's no pressure on that team. But I'm not having much faith in Thielen at this point. He was great for a while, but he's on the back 9.
He's on the back 9. Talking to Jon Impemba here from Fantasy Alarm. You guys obviously give him a follow on that Twitter machine there at jimpemba777. And for those of you who subscribe to Fantasy Alarm, which you all should, fantasyalarm.com.
Especially now.
What's
that? Here, man. Especially now. You got to sub now. You got everything we got going on in the draft guide, cheat sheet, rankings. I mean, it's draft season. Why would you not want to be part of the family and crush your drafts, right?
Right. I even said it earlier in the show. I'm like, be in our Discord. You're going to be sitting there in the middle of a draft and just hit at FA analysts and be like, I'm in the middle of a draft right now. And we can probably help you out.
I can't guarantee it happens every night, but I was in there answering questions till like 2 a.m. last night. So, at any time you're in our Discord, if you want to fire off a question, there's a chance that somebody will be up there to answer it for you, even late into the hours of the early morning. So.
And he's on the East Coast there. I'm on the West Coast, and I'll be doing it as well. No doubt. All right, John, who's the, so Daniel Jones. So, all right. So at the top, you've got Justin Fields and Justin Herbert. Those are the guys that you're locking in on. If you miss out on them, it's Daniel Jones, it's Deshaun Watson, Splash a little Kirk Cousins in there as well. Who's the quarterback that everybody's in on right now that you're like, no interest? None.
Yeah, the man that won me a SuperFlex last year because I got him for $1 my last pick of the draft. That's Geno Smith. I don't know, man. I just have like the ick on Geno Smith at this point. He had a career best season, and I understand that 2 years ago when he replaced Russell Wilson, he also performed fairly well. But a 69% completion percentage to lead the league, 30 touchdowns, like everything that could go right for Geno Smith last year went right. And now everybody's kind of jumping right back in on the bandwagon. And I understand the ADP cost really isn't that significant. So it's not going to a guy like you have to use an early round pick on. I'm just not a believer. I don't know. I feel like too many things went right for Geno Smith last year that we get a little bit of a regression. It feels difficult to expect a guy that, you know, most people consider to be out of football at this point in his career to just sort of have this career resurgence, and all of a sudden, you know, he is an MVP candidate, he's a Pro Bowler, he's a, you know, top quarterback in the conference. Like, I just don't know, and I'd rather take shots on guys around him than bite the Geno Smith bullet here.
Okay, I can get down with that. Absolutely. I grabbed him in one of the Kings Classic drafts, in the snake draft, just as like a backup QB.
Sure.
For Tua. So, you know, I went in that realm. It wasn't like a major investment. So
Right.
I get what you're saying. We'll see. Shane Waldron had him throwing last year. We'll see what happens if the running backs can stay healthy or not. Anybody out there that you're looking at, John, could be, you know, like a big surprise. It might not even be somebody you're drafting. You know, you're just kind of looking at him and being like, this guy could definitely outproduce where he's being taken right now.
Yeah, I think Kenny Pickett. I've been a little bit more bullish, I feel like, on Pickett in the Steelers offense in general than the consensus this year. The fantasy community tends to be way too reactionary to stuff. So it's like, oh, look how bad Pickett played last year. It's like, well, you know, he's a rookie. He wasn't starting right away. He got knocked out of a couple of games with injuries. You know, that Steelers team itself was just like barely hanging on in a lot of those games. They're an obvious defensive front, but the man was a rookie, and he's going to be back now in year 2 in the same offensive system with what I think is still some pretty talented wide receiving options around him. I think George Pickens is an absolute stud. It pains me the fact that the Patriots took Tyquan Thornton ahead of George Pickens in that draft last year. They still have Deontay Johnson, who is a target monster and can be great when given the opportunity. I think Freiermuth's an underrated tight end. I don't think there's anything left in Allen Robinson, but, you know, they have Calvin Austin, who they drafted last year as well, that maybe could come on and provide some value for that offense. So, you know, Pickett has some mobility, which again is kind of the key hammering point for me as well when it comes to quarterbacks. I want guys that could, you know, maybe be a surprise Blake Bortles, right? Who like would run for like 400 yards and nobody would ever expect it out of him, but he would throw, you know, enough to be a fantasy viable quarterback. Like, I think in year 2, you get Kenny Pickett in the NFL offense again, same system, another camp, another year to like catch up to the NFL speed. And he's basically going undrafted or free in most drafts here. So Pickett's a guy that I've been either throwing some late round darts in underdog or someone that I like would put like early Q watch list for me in case he looks good in week 1 or 2.
I always like to troll Kenny Pickett with my football here and just, you know,
I know,
Kenny,
the hands.
This is how it's supposed to look, Kenny. Right? This like, you should be covering those. Oh yeah, the whole thing.
Yeah,
right.
Listen, not everybody needs to have huge hands throwing a football, but I understand the downgrade on him there. But yeah, that's just a guy that I'm looking at late in drafts that I think is going to could outperform. The other thing is, and you and I talked about this on you know, the XM show, was look at where his wide receivers are going off the board, and then look where the quarterback's going off the board. So it's like you have Deontay Johnson and George Pickens going there in that like wide receiver 30-ish range. So it's like, all right, is he going to really support 2 wide receivers going borderline wide receiver 2s, early wide receiver 3s, while being QB 25 or something like that, 26, like way down the board? Something has to break here. So either he's going to outperform his ADP or those wide receivers are going to struggle. You know, and I'll bank on the wide receivers being right and bet on the QB.
I love it. All right, John, your ideal but still attainable, because my ideal super flex tandem would be Patrick Mahomes and Justin Fields, right? Like if I could get those 2 as my super flex quarterbacks, it would be amazing. But your ideal but still attainable quarterback tandem and super flex, what do you want to do?
Yeah, it's Fields and Cousins. I think that's where I tend to go. If I could knock it down, you get that elite rushing upside in Fields there, and then you have Kirk Cousins going, way later in drafts. You don't have to spend an early middle round pick on it. You can fill out the rest of your skill positions, and then you get a guy that I think again can be a back end QB1 and maybe even more if that offense really pops. Again, the one thing they talked about when they brought in that new offensive regime in Minnesota was they want to throw more. They want to throw downfield more. Then they moved on from Dalvin Cook, and we're all happy with Alexander Madison. There's less of an investment in Alexander Madison to be the guy like Dalvin Cook was to be the guy. So they could lean more on Madison as sort of the alternative to that offense and throw, kind of the way we saw Joe Mixon handled last year with Cincinnati, where Joe Mixon didn't wow the world. He was there, he was usable, but that offense was throw first. And I think that's what we could see out of Minnesota this year. So if I can grab Cousins as a QB2 in SuperFlex, which is doable, grabbing Fields where he's going in drafts, like all systems go for me.
I love it. Definitely. Man, Fields, Cousins. Yeah, that'd be a really nice. Yeah, I'm trying to think of like where you would I guess you would have to be in like the middle part of the draft, because you figure if you're doing a SuperFlex draft, Fields is going in that realm of like the middle of that first round. So you could either take him coming back in that second, or you probably don't even have to. You could probably take him in the third round and still tag him in there. I like that.
SuperFlex strategy. I always go quarterback. We get a lot of questions for that in our Discord because we have a SuperFlex or a redraft channel. A lot of people ask SuperFlex questions in there, and they're like, "Well, how do you attack it?" I'm always going quarterback. The position skill players will fall. We saw that with the Scott Fish Bowl. You were getting top end talent in rounds 5, 6, 7 because everybody was just hammering quarterbacks. So obviously that's a tight end heavy league too, so people were going tight ends early. But in SuperFlex, just clear out your quarterback position right away. You'll be surprised how good of skill position players are left on the board when you come back around picks 3, 4, and 5.
No doubt. All right, let's take a quick pause here from the SuperFlex realm, but I want to stay with the quarterbacks here because it's time right now. I'm Howard Bender, got Jon Impemba here from Fantasy Alarm. It's time to check in on the quarterback ADP over at Underdog Fantasy. Now, I just finished yet another Best Ball Mania 4 entry, and I got to tell you, man, I've got some good shares in there. I've got a lot of best ball drafts going on Underdog Fantasy. So I want to make sure that, we talk about some of the ADP there. By the way, we've got a sick deal going on with Underdog Fantasy, by the way. So do yourselves a favor. If you haven't signed up for Underdog Fantasy Best Balls, which we're going to be continuing to do between now and the start of the season, the Fantasy Alarm family, now that the Expo is out, the Expo is done and the draft guide content is out, we're going to start doing some more best ball drafts with Underdog Fantasy. You can go to fantasyalarm.com. Go to underdogfantasy.com/alarm. Use the promo code or use that promo code alarm, and you'll get a match deposit up to $100. And you can jump in on a number of these drafts that we're doing. So be sure to do that. Promo code alarm when you go to Underdog Fantasy. I highly recommend that you do that. So I want to ask you a couple of questions here about some Underdog Fantasy ADP for the quarterbacks, John.
Sure.
And let's start talking about the fact of, everybody's talking about stacking in these giant best ball tournaments, Best Ball Mania 4. A lot of people use stacking as their primary strategy. But I guess the question, about it is how much is stacking really is pushing up that quarterback ADP to a point where is it becoming intolerable for you? Are you at a point right now, or are you just saying, you know what, if this is what everybody is doing, I'm going to try kind of just go with the flow. And if I want to stack Bengals or I want to stack Bills, I'm going to make that move there. I mean, how are you handling how the ADP is pushing up here at Underdog?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's the obvious strategy, and myself and Andrew Cooper touched upon this way when that's the original WrestleMania first got released. We started noticing that trend. It was the first time in a while we saw 3 quarterbacks going so early in the second round, and the reason was because their number 1 wide receivers were going at the end of the first round. So a lot of people were just double tapping, Diggs and AJ Brown and Travis Kelce and then spinning right back around and grabbing Mahomes, Hurts, and Allen, and it was just driving up their ADP. So, listen, it's a common strategy for best ball. I have to play it as well. So it's really like, do you want to stack those quarterbacks? That's really what the decision-making process is. If you want to play Mahomes, Hurts, and Allen, then you're grabbing their number one wide receiver. Now, for me, I've actually have more shares of Devonta Smith this year than A.J. Brown. So you could go the Jalen Hurts, Devonta Smith route if you wanted to and not have to use that first-round pick on A.J. Brown. I feel like A.J. Brown could potentially be at a ceiling for where he's at, where Smith could have a little bit more growth. But, Travis Kelce is the number one guy with Mahomes. You don't really know where to go. You can throw some darts later in drafts on guys like Kadarius Toney, Rashee Rice, Sky Moore, and pair up Mahomes that way. But with Josh Allen, it's Stephon Diggs. Then it's like, do we go down the Gabriel Davis track again? Do we trust that a rookie tight end / who knows, big slot, Dalton Kincaid can be a productive guy where he's going in draft? So, there's more uncertainty, it feels like, with the number two options with Mahomes and Allen than with with Jalen Hurts. So, it's driving up the ADPs on those quarterbacks for sure. So I think QB stacking should be done when you're building out your lineups. How you want to go about it, that's up to you. But obviously it would make sense. If you want Patrick Mahomes and you want to stack a guy, you're going to be going for his top target. So it's just way it's all falling right now, Bender.
It's the way it is all falling right now, indeed. No doubt about it. Let me ask you this one here. According to Underdog's quarterback ADP right now, who do you think are the best bang for your buck QBs? Because again, folks, the Best Ball Mania 4 competition, it's one quarterback. You're starting one quarterback, but obviously you're drafting the 20 rounds. And in a best ball format, we always like to grab at least 2, possibly 3 quarterbacks if you can, in order to make that happen. But according to Underdog's ADP for quarterbacks, John, who's the best bang for your buck QBs?
Yeah, I mean, obviously going down the list, you're looking maybe forward to the mid-tier, where they're going and falling off boards here. I've mentioned some of them already. I still think Deshaun Watson and Kirk Cousins and Daniel Jones are good values. But my highest rostered Best Ball Mania quarterback is Anthony Richardson. So a guy that you didn't talk about the rushing potential for him in an offense. There was never been a quarterback, or sorry, not never been, but it's been rare instances where a quarterback that's had 100 carries has finished outside the top 10 in fantasy scoring. So if we expect Anthony Richardson to be the guy week 1 under center and the rushing potential that he has in that offense, he doesn't need to have a high passing output to be a top 10 fantasy quarterback. And he's going, in picks around 9, around 10, somewhere in that range in most standard drafts here. So if you're looking, because in these tournaments, we talk about the Best Ball Mania, you gotta have some things break right for you. And, Anthony Richardson for me could be that guy where he gives you a Justin Fields season where he's throwing 2,500 yards, but runs for 1,200, then you're great. If he gives you Daniel Jones running for 700 and throws for 3,000 yards and gives you a top 10 season, your money there. So I have Anthony Richardson, I think, is one of my best bang for bucks. And then Tua. I mean, people are worried about the concussion problems, I think, but this man was on pace to be like a top 5 quarterback last year, throwing the football with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, and nothing has changed in that offense. So if Tua is healthy and ready to go, like, I'm buying in on Tua. The one downgrade I have to Tua in maybe the AFC East a little bit, and when you and I have talked about this, is sort of the schedule that the AFC East has to play, because they have to go up against the NFC East. They're playing like the AFC West as well. So like some really tough defensive matchups that these quarterbacks are going to be running into this year.
All right. Are you buying into Anthony Richardson? How many shares of Anthony Richardson do you have?
He's my highest roster quarterback at Underdog. I have 24%.
That's impressive. That's incredibly impressive. All right.
He doesn't cost you anything. So like if you talk about it, best of all, you got to get multiple quarterbacks. So like when it comes to the middle rounds, I'm just tapping Anthony Richardson there. He's not my QB1 in leagues, but he's my QB2. But in best of all, it doesn't matter. If he becomes the guy that we think he could potentially be with that rushing, there could be weeks where he has 30 fantasy points. So like, why not snag him and pair him up with a Herbert or wait with Cousins and Watson, even guys like that. So.
All right. I love it. I absolutely love it. All right. Again, guys, go sign up over at underdogfantasy.com. Use that promo code ALARM. Make sure you do that. You get $100 match deposit. And again, if you want in on all of these best ball drafts that Jon is doing, that I'm doing, the family is doing, Andrew Cooper, Britt Flynn, Colby Conway, you got to go sign up over at underdogfantasy.com. Use that promo code ALARM and get yourself that matched deposit. Jon, all right, let's move on and talk a little SuperFlex discussion here as far as quarterbacks go. This was brought up at the Expo. Should we be playing more SuperFlex leagues since single QB leagues tend to devalue the most important position on the field? Do you agree or disagree with that statement?
Disagree. If you want to add a second quarterback, fine, but I don't need a SuperFlex league. I actually hate SuperFlex leagues. I try to avoid them where I can. I get invited to a couple of them. I find myself saying yes to like one or two, but like I don't generally enjoy the SuperFlex. I'd rather the traditional format. You don't play two quarterbacks, right? Like unless you're the Saints, apparently. So you have one quarterback on the field. You got a couple of running backs that swap in and out. You got a handful of wide receivers. You got a tight end. Let's roll. I don't need to overcomplicate. All these things, and I don't need the extra quarterback. No, I'm good.
Okay. All right. So if you're setting up a league right now, you're and your friends are like, yo, Jon, set up a league. Let's play. Let's have you're saying no to SuperFlex.
I'm saying no SuperFlex. Yeah. I just don't enjoy it. It just like, I don't necessarily like drafts that force the way a draft has to be done. And SuperFlex does that. The first 12 picks of our staff mock SuperFlex are all quarterbacks. Yeah, that's boring, right? Like it's just do a random draw at that point of quarterbacks. Like that's basically what the draft order is. And then once all the quarterbacks are taken, the real draft starts. So like to me, I don't find there to be I don't find them to be enjoyable. That being said, I do find to have success in them. Again, I won my SuperFlex league last year. It was an auction at Geno Smith for $1. I've won other leagues where like I've gone the other way around it, where I wait to take my QB2. Because everybody's letting McCaffrey or Eckler or all these top end guys drop late first, second, third, and you just stack up the top end skill position players. But I don't enjoy the format. No, it's not for me.
Okay. Should all SuperFlex leagues have a third round reversal because of the way it always goes with those top QBs?
Yeah, you can. Again, I'm indifferent on third round reversal. I know that we got a question on that in the Discord yesterday as well. Scott Fishbowl does a third round reversal. And when we do the Scott Fishbowl, I asked to have the last pick. I'd rather pick last, first, and first, the way the third round reversal works. So, that's fine. But it's all preference. I don't find that it gives you an advantage one way or the other. So it's just the way sort of your league preference. I don't really have much more to that.
Now, a lot of people who, are setting up new leagues, a lot of people do like pick your draft position. We get that question all the time. Where should I be drafting? I'm not going to say where you should be drafting in a SuperFlex league, but I guess the real question is as you're going through it, like at what point in the QB tier break do you default to taking Jefferson, Chase, McCaffrey? You take that running back wide receiver instead of your first QB. Who's the lowest QB that you would say that you would take before you start hitting on Chase and Jefferson and those guys?
In the Scott Fishbowl, I took Trevor Lawrence 12, and then I went Jamar Chase with the first pick in the second round. So maybe that's your get all the QB1s out. Once there's no more QB1s, maybe then go in that direction. Looking at underdog here, for example, maybe Deshaun Watson or Tua or something like that. But it's all draft preference for how you want to go about it. So,
okay. Last question, Jon, before I let you go. And I thank you so much again for joining us here on the show. I know that you're like slam busy, crazy.
Always happy to join you, Bender. You know that.
Stop it, you. God, you.
Yeah,
How long would you actually wait to grab your quarterbacks if you wanted to steal all that wide receiver, running back, tight end value while everybody else is going QB crazy? Like, how long would you actually wait? Like the first QB who you would take before, as your number one guy, and then you'd probably like double tap
in a SuperFlex.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it'd probably depend on where I am in the draft as well. But end of round 2, round 3, maybe. Like, it would depend. I mean, because then at that point, you're really running into like the long end of getting on a run where like your QB1 could be like, I don't know, CJ Stroud, right? Like Kenny Pickett, Mac Jones, because people are gonna get their second quarterback by round 4 for the most part. So yeah, it would be tough. If you wanted to go McCaffrey because you're sitting there at pick 8, and then you swing back around and maybe take your first QB, 4th pick in the second round. Maybe then you're looking at like the Geno Smith, Kirk Cousin ranges. That's fine. But if you wait again, by the time it gets all the way back down to you really could be looking at some ugly choices there, like Stafford, Love. That group could be your QB1, and you're really banking on those skill position players to carry you through. So.
All right. Well, there you go, folks. Jon Impemba, fantasyalarm.com. His Twitter handle says it right there, at jimpemba777. He's going to have a breakout QB article coming out in the Fantasy Alarm Draft Guide this week. So you're definitely going to want to be on the lookout for that. He's already got it broken down for tiers. He's already talked late round QBs. We know that he loves Justin Fields, but I'm sure that we're going to see some other names in that article. So
100%.
Jon, thank you so much for joining us, man. Really appreciate it, and have a great rest of your day.
Anytime, Howard. I'll talk to you later.
All right, there you go. Again, Jon Impemba. Give him a follow, people. Give everybody in the family a follow, at jimpemba777, and then pop into our Discord. We'll give you the Twitter handles for every single person. So, I want to take the time now. I wanted to make sure that I paid the Queen's Classic its due. So, I'm going to go back to my good man, Ernie, and say, Ern, could you do me a favor and pull up that draft board? Yeah, there we go. So it was a snake draft. Now, some fantastic competitors in here. Sam Holt, Kendall Valenzuela from Fantasy Life, Casey Kasem, Linda Godfrey. That's at Lindellians, in case anybody wanted to know. She's the kicker guru. Jen Polvolt, Faith Enos, Kelly Singh, who was actually a guest on the Fantasy Alarm show in a draft that we did together here a couple of weeks ago. Bonnie Robinson, the fantasy football queen. Lisa Ann, who, by the way, do you guys know Lisa Ann, Howard Bender, doing a show again together? We did a show together on Sirius XM for years. We did a Sunday night show together. We did a Saturday afternoon show together. Lisa Ann, absolutely one of my favorite, hardest working lady here in the fantasy realm. She and I, coming up Wednesday nights, 7 p.m. Eastern. Howard Bender is going to be the eye candy, right? I'm going to be the one that's sitting there hanging out with Lisa Ann Does Fantasy Better. That's the name of the show. Lisa Ann Does Fantasy Better, starring Lisa Ann. And I get to kind of sit there, chill, be the analyst, help out, give some suggestions, throw some witty banter, make a couple of smart-ass comments, probably get yelled at a little bit. All of that, that all the antics with me and Lisa Ann, that is all going to be front and center right here. It's on the Fantasy Alarm YouTube page, the Better Sports Network YouTube page. It'll be on the app, the Better Sports Network app. You don't want to miss it. Mark it down your calendars right now. Wednesday night, 7 p.m. Eastern. Lisa Ann Does Fantasy Better with Lisa Ann and Howard Bender. So she was in there. There was Gemma Martinez, Julia Papworth, Lauren Carpenter at Stepmom Lauren, Fantasy Alarms Britt Flynn, and Maddie Kroll picking on the wheel in this one here. Now, I haven't really had the opportunity to super break down this draft. I mean, listen, I know how good and strong all these competitors are, so that this is a tough draft. There were definitely some different things that went down, and you can just see right here by the look of it. Obviously, Jefferson Chase 1-2, no big surprise there, but here you go. Kelsey, then Cooper Kupp, then Austin Eckler, Stephon Diggs, and A.J. Brown. I found that to be incredibly interesting. Then Nick Chubb, How about Christian McCaffrey falling to Lisa Ann? What is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9. Outside of SuperFlex leagues, that is the lowest I've seen Christian McCaffrey go. So the ladies mitigating their injury risk here and passing on Christian McCaffrey. Lisa Ann jumps on that value because that is value. Single QB league, McCaffrey at 9. That is definite value. Then went Tyreek Hill, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Saquon Barkley, Bijan Robinson. Shout out to my girl, Britt Flynn, for getting Bijan Robinson over there. It was that 9, 10, 11, 12, 13th. 13th. Unbelievable. And then Maddie Kroll turns around and she goes Patrick Mahomes and CeeDee Lamb on the turn. So couple of surprises, I think, for a lot of people. What I love here is what Maddie did with the Patrick Mahomes pick. Clearly, she wanted him. Clearly, there was, that was a goal going into this draft. I want to come away with Patrick Mahomes. You know that you can't, you can't leave him. We weren't going to wait until the second or the third round. Well, I mean, the second round she could have, technically. But she wasn't going to get him in the third round. So if you want Patrick Mahomes, and that's something that you guys all should know when you're picking at that back end, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, you're probably going to have to reach for a couple of guys because you don't want to risk them not coming back to you. I mean, that's definitely a move there. So Maddie Kroll obviously locked in on Patrick Mahomes. I will not begrudge that move at all from a 14th spot in a 14-teamer. And then from there, you saw it. Then it's the usual fare, right? CeeDee Lamb, Garrett Wilson, Derrick Henry, Devontae Adams. So we've seen all of this. The ladies do it as good, if not better, than the men here in the fantasy realm. So and you're seeing the same trends. Like that's the thing also, is that you're not seeing anything different. I will say this, and I will speak out on this aspect here. I love Bob Long and I love the Kings Classic, like overall, like the drafts and things like that. My personal feeling, and this is me talking, this is Howard Bender's opinion. I don't really feel the need to separate a Queen's Classic. I feel like all of these women should be just kind of mixed in. Call it the Kings Classic, call it the royalty drafts, whatever you want to do. If you want to, eliminate the Kings versus Queens kind of namesake there, right? And put all of these women into the drafts that we're doing for the Kings Classic. Because again, the Jim Brown division has the snake and the auction, but the other divisions don't just do both drafts. So you've got multiple snake drafts. You've got multiple auction drafts. I'm not going to get into the whole, the equality and this and that. But if I'm going to, I guess I kind of am. I guess I really am. I'm making that statement. There's no reason to separate them off. Put them all in one big pool. You've got enough drafts. You've got enough fantasy analysts that you should be in there. 6 women, 6 men. Boom. Make sure that it's even distribution and you go from there. Or if you don't want to, if you don't have enough, volunteers to compete in these drafts for travel reasons or whatever. All right. But you got to make sure that there's no reason to separate things off. There's just, we host the Women of Fantasy Football here at Fantasy Alarm and the Better Sports Network. Our good friend Josh Hudson, him with Faith Enos, they run the Women of Fantasy Football. Britt Flynn does the shows, as well. So, I mean, I guess my feeling about it is that we shouldn't be looking at who's a man and who's a woman in this space. We're all analysts, and fantasy analyst is a unisex term. So there's no reason to separate it out. I would love to play, against all of these ladies. I competed against Britt Flynn in the Kings Classic auction last year. I had to take a drink there because she knocked me out of the playoffs, and I'm a little sensitive to it. And so every time I bring it up, there's a little acid reflux. that comes up there. And so I'm against that. But listen, I'm in a league with Britt. I'm in a league with Lauren. Excuse me. Who else am I in leagues with? I think Lisa Ed and I are going to put together a league. So we all compete. There's a lot of Scott Fishbowl people in here who I compete against. There's a lot of the Scott Fishbowl eliminators that we go through, the FCC eliminators, the Fantasy Cares eliminators. So there's no need to. So Bob Long, if you're watching, if you're listening, my man, put them all in the same drafts. Everybody, man, woman, doesn't matter. Put everybody in there and just make it one big giant thing. And I think it'll definitely go a long way. It'll definitely go a long way. So because again, there's no reason to separate the two. And if you're out there and you're like, Bender, shut the F up, whatever, because the women don't know anything. Like if you're that person, well, then you're a Neanderthal and you don't belong here anyway. And I don't need you in this space. There's no reason to separate them off. And I'll just kind of, I'll leave it at that because I just want to make sure that I leave it at that. And looking through this draft here, I gotta say, whose team should we break? Let's break down Britt Flynn's team. Since she's a member of the FA Nation, let's break down Britt's team. Let's talk about what we've got. And I mean, I think we could talk very candidly and very openly about it. Bijan Robinson, so good. Garrett Wilson, absolutely love him. Bob Wischusen from ESPN has gotten me all sorts of hyped for the Fatty McFats. The ladies get it done, 100%. Garrett Wilson. So Bob's getting me all hyped up about the Jets. That and he said it. By the end of the season, Garrett Wilson will have the most targets on this Jets offense. Lamar Jackson, stud. DJ Moore, going to be Justin Fields' top guy. Darren Waller, top 5 tight end, no doubt about it. We love George Pickens. We love Treylon Burks. Damn, where else is she going here? Let's scroll down after Treylon Burks here, Ern. Antonio Gibson here. Again, we can talk about Eric Bieniemy's offense, can't we? The Chiefs' offense. We know, and we've talked about this, pass-catching running backs in the Chiefs offense, that works so well. I think Bieniemy, listen, I'm not going to take anything away from Brian Robinson, but I think Brian Robinson is more of a between the tackles type guy. And I think that what we're looking at here with the possibility of Antonio Gibson, I think the Washington team, I'm not, Commanders, the football team, whatever you want to call them, right now, they were underutilizing Antonio Gibson. I think that this scheme, kind of caters to him a little bit more. He was a hybrid wide receiver running back at the University of Memphis, and we just never saw the Washington team passing to him. I don't know. Maybe it was their quarterback situation. Maybe it was the play calling. Maybe they didn't dig it. It's one of the reasons why I think Austin Eckler, I'm a little shaky on him because I know that Kellen Moore's offense does not cater to pass catching running backs. It's not all about the dump off there. That's why for the last couple of seasons, Tony Pollard never really hit the way everybody expected it to hit or to really push him over the top. So it's something to think about there for that. But now you look at the offensive scheme here, and I think Antonio Gibson definitely fits this scheme a lot better. Greg Dulcich is the tight end for the Denver Broncos. I tell you that the injury to Tim Patrick really helped boost Dulcich's value. Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, no doubt about it. Marvin Mims on 3 wide receiver sets. But I think we're going to see a lot of 2 tight end sets. The Denver Broncos brought in Adam Troutman, who was a blocking tight end for both Joe Lombardi and Sean Payton back in New Orleans. So when they start going into their 2 tight end sets, you're going to have Troutman tethered to the line and helping out with the blocking. Dulcich is going to be that guy who's going to be released into the, with a solid route tree. And, we should probably see a lot of that tight end drag route that mirrors. That's where when the quarterback's rolling out left or right, whatever, the tight end is running, his routes basically just mirroring what the quarterback is doing. So that way, when the quarterback rolls one way or the other, yeah, he's scanning the entire field looking for his targets. But so he's always got the tight end in his field of vision. And if that, slow ass linebacker can't cover the guy, if he can't cover the tight end, you just drop that right in there while he's, running on the seam. And that's going to be a great spot here, I think, for our guy Greg Dulcich. I think it's a great pick. She handcuffs Bijan Robinson with Tyler Algier. I love that. Some people say that Tyler Algier is going to have some standalone value. Maybe he sees like 5 to 7 carries per game. I mean, 5 to 7 carries per game doesn't scream to me about a guy who, you want you're looking at for standalone value. I know what he did last year, but I also think that, if the Falcons were so high on what Tyler Algier did for them last season, late in the year, why were they so hell-bent on bringing in Bijan Robinson? They view Bijan Robinson as an every down back, pass catching threat, rushing threat, inside runs, outside runs, doesn't matter. They look at him, Bijan Robinson, in that light. Tyler Algier, I think they look more at like Tyler Algier as a between the tackles kind of a guy. He's probably going to be your short yardage guy. He's probably going to vulture more touchdowns from Bijan than we would really like to see. But I mean, I love this handcuff for Britt, because when you're handcuffing off of the Falcons, it's not about, you're not investing in the players. You're investing in the system. And that means that, that Arthur Smith loves to run the football. And that's again, why we teach systems so constantly, because you want to see how these players play in this system. So Britt goes with Russell Wilson actually as her second QB, which I love, because you got the pairing right there with Greg Dulcich. And, you're going to have Lamar Jackson, any injuries notwithstanding, and do that. But here you go. Let's look at the back end. Let's look at the back end of the drafts, because this is what we talk about constantly. We talk about the value. We talk about the upside that you're looking for. You're not just making haphazard picks. You're not grabbing the RB4 on some team and hoping for injuries to happen. You'll have that guy dropped in no time. But look at the upside plays here. Josh Downs, slot receiver for the Colts. Michael Pittman, Alec Pierce, they're going to get great work, tremendous work. But Josh Downs could be a really intriguing option. And I think that his presence actually kind of hurts Jelani Woods, the tight end, a little bit. So I'm looking at that as, I think that's a quality pick. Ty Chandler, we know that the Vikings are looking for their pass-catching running back. Yes, they brought in Kareem Hunt for a visit, but Ty Chandler could get a bunch of look. Van Jefferson is the number 2 wide receiver for the Rams. Maybe he's the number 2 target overall. More than Higbee? It's very possible. It's very, very possible that that's the case. And, to sit there and, at pick 184 to grab Van Jefferson, to know that if Stafford is slinging the rock and he's looking in that direction, it's nice. Leonard Fournette, if he lands with a team, there's some upside for certain. And then Cedric Tillman, I think wide receiver for the Cleveland Browns. I know everybody's in on Tank Dell, who I guess had a really nice preseason game. But Cedric Tillman, again, you look down these this wide receiver room for the Cleveland Browns, and listen, I love Deshaun Watson. I think he is a fantastic option. And then you've got Amari Cooper. We like Elijah Moore in the slot for sure, but is Donovan Peoples-Jones really that locked in that we can turn around and say that DPJ is going to be that guy? I don't think so. I think I think he'll get mixed in, but Cedric Tillman, could be a decent option here. David Bell, that's what I meant. David Bell, not Tank Dell. Tank Dell's with the Houston Texans. Oh, see? This is what happens when you don't sleep, people. David Bell was that late option. They brought in Marquise Goodwin. There's not a lot of options, off of this. So I think Cedric Tillman could be an intriguing option. And I mean, I didn't even look to see if and where Donovan Peoples-Jones went in this draft, but I mean, it wouldn't surprise me to see a guy like Cedric Tillman go a little bit earlier than him. So I like that. I applaud Britt for doing the right thing, getting some upside plays here at the tail end of that draft. Again, you guys should definitely check out this entire draft board. Again, SiriusXM Fantasy is tweeting them out and discussing them. We're tweeting them out here. I've got, a couple of retweets. Follow me at RotoBuzzGuy, and we'll drop that off. So, wow, that was a lot of show here for the last 2 hours, and I thank anybody and everybody for tuning in, for listening. I appreciate everybody who chimed in the chat room. If you guys have some last-minute questions, I've got a couple of minutes here to spare at the end of today's show. So if you have a draft question, a strategy question, you want to drop that into my lap, I am more than happy to let you know that. Or you can turn around and just, hit me up and go with at RotoBuzzGuy. Hit me up on Twitter, and I will jump into that. So some things to know after this. Listen, Front Yard Fantasy is coming up next, their fantasy football game show. So you don't want to miss that. And then come back from 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern also. It's Better Sports Betting with Dan Servadidio. And I hear he's got one hell of a handsome dude as his co-host today. So you're going to want to chime in on that and take a look and see who we've got. So that's what's coming up next here. Again, Front Yard Fantasy Football Game Show from 3 to 4. Better Sports Betting with Dan Servadidio and me. Oh, I mean the handsome guy from 4 to 5. And then from 5 to 6, MLB DFS live stream. Jon Impemba and James Grande. They take you guys through everything. Don't forget this Wednesday night, it is a brand new Howard Bender, Lisa Ann. It's Lisa Ann Does Fantasy Better, 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday nights. Bookmark it. Put it in your calendar. You are not going to want to miss this show at all. Again, if you also want in on those best ball drafts that we're doing with our friends over at Underdog Fantasy, when you sign up at Underdog Fantasy, make your first deposit, put in the promo code ALARM. You'll get 100% match deposit up to $100. And that's a lot. That's 4 Best Ball Mania 4 entries that you can end up, getting for free right there. So again, and you go over to Underdog Fantasy, promo code ALARM is the way you want to go. I want to thank Jon Impemba for joining me. I want to thank Ernie Acosta, my producer. I appreciate all you guys for tuning in here. I'm Howard Bender. This has been Alarm Fantasy Football. We'll catch you next time.